The shaker peg shelf is made up of a couple different components. The first thing we have are the shaker pegs themselves. Now, we don't make the shaker pegs, we just purchase those. We also have what we call chair buttons. We used those before. They're going to cover up this hole and that hole when you actually mount this thing to the wall. And they're also purchased components. This part is what I call the wall plate. So this is the part that gets screwed to the wall. And then we have a bracket and another bracket. So we need two brackets, and notice that the brackets are double thick. And then finally, on top is what I call the shelf board. So here we are at the miter saw. I've got the board on the table up against the fence, and I need to align my board. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the saw blade next to the line. I'm putting the saw blade right on top of my check mark, but so that the edge of the saw blade lines up right next to the line. I pull out the saw, I turn it on, I'm going to plunge it down, and I'm going to push it forward. So that's pull, plunge, and then a push. Now, because the board might have had a little warp to it, maybe it wasn't quite all the way against the fence the whole way, our next step is to square both ends. So when I say square both ends, I'm just going to take off a little bit, a sliver cut on each end. After we rough to length, normally what we do is we go over onto the jointer and joint one edge. But we already have a nice jointed edge, and the other side is also nice and jointed. After we rough to length with S2S lumber, we'd always stop by the jointer and smooth and straighten one edge. But this is S4S, and both edges are already straight and smooth, so we're ready to rip to the proper width. So we're going to rip to 5 3/8 at the table saw. After roughing the length on the miter saw, if we were using S2S lumber, we'd head over to the jointer and smooth and flatten and straighten one edge. But the lumber we purchased is S4S, so one edge should already be flat, straight, and smooth. So what we can do is we can rip to width. What we're going to do is we're going to rip to 5 3/8. Now we're going to square the ends. So when I say square the end, what we're going to do is we're just going to take a small little sliver cut off just to make sure that our corner here is going to be 90 degrees and up here it's going to be 90 degrees. We're going to do that to both ends of the board. Now that the board is the right width and both ends have been squared, we can lay out the finished length. The finished length is supposed to be 34. Again, the tape measure is parallel to the edge of the board. I put a mark at 34, and then I'm going to use my speed square again to come over, and when the speed square aligns with my mark, I go ahead, I trace the line. Although it's obvious in this situation, I'm going to put a check mark on the side of the line to remind me that when I go to the miter saw, I'm going to put the blade on top of the check mark, and I'm going to line up the edge of the blade with the line. I don't want to cut right on top of the line. I want to put the saw blade next to the line. So that step is going to be finished to length on the miter saw, 34 inches. The shelf board is going to be screwed down into the wall plate and into the brackets. After we screw it down, we plug the holes to make them disappear. So we need to now lay out a series of holes so that we can the shelf board is going to get screwed down to the wall plate, and it's also going to get screwed down into the brackets. So now what we need to do is we need to lay out a series of holes. So the first hole I'm going to go ahead and look at is the center. The shelf board is going to get screwed down into the wall plate here, here, and here. The shelf board is also going to get screwed down into the bracket here, 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 and there. After we screw it down, what we do is we plug the holes so that these screws become invisible. The first hole that we're going to be concerned with is right here. So it's going to be right in the middle of our board, right in the center. So half of 34 is 17. So from this edge to this edge, it's going to be 17. Now we know that the wall plate has a thickness of 3/4 of an inch. So what we want to do is we need to screw down into the center of the wall plate. So half of 3/4 is 3/8. So from the center, from the edge to the center of the hole is 3/8 of an inch. That's going to be true for this one and that one also. These holes are 4.5 inches from the edge. From the edge to the center is 4.5 inches. From the edge to the center here, like I said, is 3/8. From the edge to the center of this hole is 1 3/4. And from the edge to the center of this hole would be 3.5 inches. So we need to lay that out on our board. Let's lay out the center hole first. We know that it was supposed to be 17 inches from the end. So I'm going to go ahead and just put a mark at 17. The other holes are 4.5 inches from the edge. So the only thing I've done right now is I got to mark at 17. I'll mark 4.5 inches from the end, and again over here 4.5 inches from the end. Then what I'll do is I'm going to hook on my speed square again. I hook my speed square on, and I'm going to slide the speed square over until I hit that mark. When I do, I go ahead and I trace a line. I'll do the same thing here. I slide it over until I hit that spot, and I make a line. And I'll do the same thing here. Now, for this hole here, I need to come in 3/8 of an inch. I need to measure from here up 3/8 of an inch, or down from the edge. The easiest way to do it, because we're going to have to repeat this dimension a lot, is to use what I call a combination square. So the combination square, I've got the thumb screw, I loosen it up, I can slide this back and forth, and what I want to do is I want to set the combination square to 3/8 of an inch. So now that I've got it set to 3/8 of an inch, what I can do is I can hook that on. I can come over here and I can just go ahead and I can trace the end of it. I can do that here. And also here. So now what I've got is I've got X marks the spot. Right there is where I need a hole. Right there is where I need a hole. And right here is where I need a hole. The combination square is great for doing those repeated dimensions. Now, for these holes over here, I'm probably not going to use the combination square. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to use the tape measure. I hook my tape measure on, and I have to put a mark at 1 3/4 of an inch. And then I'm going to put a mark at 3.5 inches. Again, you can see X marks the spot. X marks the spot, and I'll do the same thing on the other end. 1 3/4 and 3.5. X marks the spot. The next step is to drill those holes. Before we drill though, we're going to use the awl to make a little dent or dimple right at X marks the spot, so that when we go over to the drill press, we can line up the drill press with our hole, where we want the hole. After we have our holes laid out, we're almost ready to drill them. Before we go to the drill press, let's use the awl, and we're going to go ahead right at X marks the spot. What we're going to do is we're going to put a little dimple there. And this is softwood, we don't need a hammer. I just give it a little tap with my palm. So this is going to allow us to easily line up our drill bit with the center of the holes. Now we're ready to drill the holes. This first hole we're going to drill does not go all the way through the board. So I don't really need a support piece underneath, because I'm not going to go all the way through the board. We only want to go down a little ways. And so on this drill bit, just like we did on our cutting board, we only want to go down a maximum depth of this deep. Right, so right at the top of the head of the drill bit, that's as far down as we want to go. So again, I will line up I'm all lined up. And the maximum we want to go down is about right there. So, not that deep. Go ahead and drill the rest of the holes. Now that we have our holes drilled for the plugs, what we need to do is now we need to make a through hole for the screw. So this time we're just going to use a handheld drill, and we have a 3/16 of an inch twist drill. We're going to go all the way through. Normally we'd want to put a support board underneath this, but just a little bit of tear out in this project is going to be okay because it's going to get covered up. So just with the board hanging over the edge of the table, there's a little dimple right down in the hole. Just go ahead and drill your screw holes. So those holes are for the screw, so that the screw will just drop right down through. So it's what we call a clearance hole. So that screw is just going to just slightly friction fit, slide through that hole. Next you'll see we have a nice routed edge, a nice OG edge running along what I call the bottom of the shelf board, and that it goes around this edge also. So what we're going to do is we're going to router the front edge and the two ends. We're not going to router the back edge. I think that would look funny. So we're going to router the front edge and the two ends. And if you notice, right, the routed edge is going to go down. So it's going to be opposite of where the holes are. So now we're ready to router our shelf board. Keep in mind that the routed edge is going to be the opposite side of the holes. So we're going to router this side. Right? So what that means is when you're over here at the router table, you have to see the holes. The holes, the big holes, should be facing up. Keep in mind, we're going to router the end first, the other end first, then the front edge, and we're not going to router the back. So I might just put myself a little note right here, maybe a circle with a slash through it, and don't router the back edge. The OG bit is all chucked up in our table router. Like I said, we're going to go ahead and we have to do the end first because we're going to experience some tear out here. We want to try and avoid tear out and make our project look as nice as possible in the end. So what we're going to do is we do the end first, and you have to use a support stick. We're going to put a support board or stick right behind here. We're going to back up this little corner, and as we push this thing through, the support stick is going to support those wood fibers. So we go ahead and we run it through. We do one end, we spin it around. Again, use the support stick. We're going to go ahead, we're going to run it through, and then we're going to do the front edge. So what we can do is we can take away the support stick now, and we just run this thing through the whole entire length. All right, we're ready to router the edge. Don't forget, we want the routered edge to be on the bottom. This is the bottom. So what we want to do is when we're routering, we want to see the big holes. The big holes are going to be up. We're going to router the end, the front edge, but not the back edge. So I might give myself a little note. I might put a little circle with a slash through it right here. So just a reminder, don't router the back edge. When we router, we always do the end grain first. We're going to go ahead and we're going to do the end grain first. And when this is coming through, it's going to want to tear out the wood fibers right here in this corner. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a support stick, a backer stick, and we do one end. We're going to run one end through. Just spin the board around. Put the support stick on the other end. Push it through. Spin the board around. And now we're just going to go ahead and we're going to run the front edge all the way through. At this point, you don't need the support stick. Remember, don't do the back edge. when you're finished routering, the only thing we have to do left now is sand. So you're going to find that this is soft wood. It's going to sand much, much easier and much quicker. So you're going to start with 80 grit, and you're going to probably spend half the time sanding that you did with some of our hardwood projects. Keep the sander flat on the board. You're going to go with the grain. You're going to sand what I call the top, the bottom. I would sand the front edge. Just be careful that we don't ruin our routed edge. So just go lightly, just keep it nice and flat. So again, 80 grit for maybe a minute. Okay, then you're going to switch to 120 grit. Again, maybe a minute. You'll find that it's really, really smooth. With softwood, what happens when we're sanding is we're mashing down the grain of the wood. We're smushing it down into the board. So what happens though, when we add a little moisture to the board, it's going to puff back up again. And those little wood fibers are going to puff back up and make it feel rough. So that happens when we add moisture to this. When we add a finish to it, a stain or polyurethane, the fibers plump back up again. So after we rough and medium sand, what we're going to do now is we're going to raise the grain. We're going to add moisture to the board. The wood fibers are going to puff up, and then what we're going to do is we're going to fine sand. So how do we raise the grain? We're just going to take a wet paper towel and we wet the whole entire board down. The top, the bottom, the edges, the ends. And so what we do is we just make this thing nice and wet. We wait until it dries, and then we sand with 220 just for a couple seconds, and it'll smooth our board back out. All right, and then the last and final step, you have to put your name on the board. Okay, so your name is going to go along the back edge. So the back edge is where the holes are. Okay, so we want your name there, not just your initials. And I also want your period there, because what's going to happen is eventually we're going to put these in the drying room after we finish them. So we need your name and period so there's no confusion on whose project is whose. All right, good luck, and let's make a shelf board.